Welcome in to the Fantasy Sanctuary. This is the Best Ball Show. I'm Tom Strachan. You found the Fantasy Sanctuary. We're going to talk through secrets of Draftkings Best Ball tonight, dive into a draft. I'm going to take as many of your questions as we go. In a couple of minutes' time, though, I know that a lot of you are waiting to hear who's going to win that prize of the Scott Fishbowl entry. So we're going to get to that. We've got a runners-up prize of drafted with myself in the FFPC $35 Superflex contest. And we've also got 5 copies of Rich's incredible rookie guides to give away. So loads to give away, loads to talk about. Just want to say a big thank you, though, at the top of the show. And before we get into the draw, I just want to talk quickly about what we are at Fantasy Sanctuary and just give you an idea of the kind of content that we've been making here. So we started this channel back in January, myself and Rich Cooling, also known as Dynasty Island. And when we decided to team up, we wanted to combine all our collective knowledge of fantasy football and make something that was fun, that was innovative, and we used graphics to really make the YouTube experience as good as it possibly could be. So Rich is a Dynasty expert, like I said. He writes for DLF as his own Dynasty Island Patreon, puts out some incredible content on there. His survival guide, it's the best resource I've found for anything related to Dynasty. And you can see some of the stuff we've got on here. You know, since January, he's been making countless videos about Dynasty strategy, you know, whether it's how to fix an awful Dynasty team. That was one of mine. Whether it's like helping you make better trades, whether it's talking like Dynasty rookie mocks, trades, all the way down to the rookie preview series when we went through a huge amount of players and just what they were going to be like for the NFL. Myself, I've written for Underdog, Football Outsiders, FantasyPros, as well as my own website, nflbestball.co.uk. I'd say I specialize in best ball and DFS content, but it's not uncommon to hear me talking about anything that, you know, I can talk about when it comes to fantasy football. So I do a weekly stream at least once a week, sometimes 2 times a week, doing best ball streams. I'll do best ball strategy, pretty much anything else I can. In the last few weeks, we've had people like Pat Corain, Eric Beinford, Colin Kelly, Sam Hoppen from 4for4. This week, we've got Pete Overzet coming on, Josh Norris from Underdogs coming on in a couple of weeks' time as well. So we're really trying to bring as many great people on to help you win as many of your fantasy football leagues as possible. So if you have found us for the first time tonight, thank you. We really do appreciate it. We love the fantasy football community, and we're just trying to help you as much as we can. When we set up this account, the aim was simple. 1,000 subs by the time that we got to training camp. And with your help, we're already over 900. And so we want to pay that back. So let's get on to the draw. I know there's a lot of people here waiting. We've got 25 people watching live. Shout out to Ryan, Andrew, Kelly, Chris from Fantasy Football Garage, who's just finished rowing and drafting a best ball team on stream at the same time. Will in the chat. We've got Rich there. Deft Angel, always hopping in our drafts. And then, of course, thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate you. And let's get these entries sorted into the randomizer wheel. So let me remove that one and share my screen. So all in all, we had 118 entries into this. So I'm just going to stop sharing that one and then share this one. Here we go. Fantasy football's favorite, the wheel of names. So there you go. You can see we've got all of them in there, shuffled them up. So what we're going to do first is we will give away the Scott Fishbowl entry first. Second, it will be the $35 Superflex FFPC draft for myself, which we'll do that as a slow draft so we can chat back and forth about the players we're going to pick. And then after that, we're going to do the 5 rookie guides from Rich. Before I get onto the draw, hit that like button down below. Really want to see this video having lots of likes. I know you guys are enjoying the content. And let's get on with it. So this is the Scott Fishbowl one. Let's go. Ooh. Oh, creeping over, all 22, Fantasy GM. You are the winner of the Scott Fishbowl. We will get in touch with you and we will sort that out. and we will put you in touch with Scott Fish, who will get you entered into it. If you're in the chat, all 22, give us a shout. Appreciate you. And we'll get on with the other draw in just a second once I make a note of that. So, yeah, the next prize is going to be the $35 Superflex draft. Apparently, I've forgotten how to type whilst trying to do all this at once. That's okay. So we'll remove all 22 out of there and spin again. Ooh, there we go. Potty Toddy 43, you will be drafting with me in the $35 Superflex FFPC contest. There's a $50,000 prize up top. Hopefully we can win that. So I will be in touch with you later this evening to sort that one out. And now we've got the 5 rookie guides, which will be given away from Rich. If you haven't read it already, it's brilliant. I think it's easily one of the best pieces of content out there, and it really will help you crush your drafts this year. So we've got 5 of them to go. The first one. Oh, Deft Angel, who's in the chat. Congratulations to Chris. Very smart guy. Always a pleasure to see him in our drafts. Just make a note of that one. And then we'll go with the next 4. Here we go. Creeping around. Sapola, you get the next rookie guide. Rich will be in touch and send that your way very shortly. Let's move on to the next one. So that's 2 of the rookie guides done. We've got 3 more to go. FFB Garage, you win the next one. Lovely to see. I really can't thank you all enough for taking part in this. We were blown away by the response, which is why we've thrown in extra prizes to this one. And we really hope that you guys are enjoying the content as much as we are. A-Stick99, you win the 4th copy of a rookie guide. We have 1 more to go. As you can hear, it is chucking it down here in England. The sanctuary is a little bit rainy today. Oh, A-Stick. Right. As long as A-Stick99 doesn't come up again, we'll be all right. So the 5th and final one goes to Study Dynasty FFF. Hannah Rowland just missing out, but I know she's got a copy already, so I'm sure she'll be okay with that. So that is all of the prizes given out. We really do appreciate everybody who's tuned in for those, and obviously congratulations to all the winners. We'll be in touch with you to make sure that we get those prizes sorted out. And yeah, stay tuned though, because over the coming weeks we are going to do a lot more Scott Fishbowl contest content. We're going to be talking about the scoring system, about players who might be undervalued, about draft strategy. Myself and Rich have both played in the contest for a few years now. Rich is doing the live draft in London. I'll be doing the slow draft in the Hard Rock Cafe division. And we will be doing everything we possibly can to help you crush that draft. So we're going to talk now about Draftkings Best Ball. And Draftkings, they don't like sharing the data. It's really difficult to find stuff in the same way that Underdog and FFPC put out their data. But there are certain ways you can get around it and sort of start to find certain aspects of it. So all the data tonight is taken from the final of the Draftkings Milly Maker contest last year. There was 800,000 people in the contest, and in the finals, I believe it was 969 people. So that's a lot of teams where we can look at them and we can say, these teams did this well, these teams built like this or that, etc., etc. And the first thing that's worth talking about is the winning roster. And when you look at this one, I've talked about it on streams before, it's not the prettiest team. It was a 4 QB, 6 RB, 7 wide receivers, and 3 tight end build. And the first thing that always stands out to me is how little stacks this team had. Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy. And if you drafted a lot of Russell Wilson last year, you probably didn't think that he was the kind of player who was going to deliver $1 million in return. And you can also see there's a bit of an Eagles stack here with Kenneth Gainwell, A.J. Brown, and Devonta Smith, but no Jalen Hurts. So we'll move on, though. The average build of the teams in the finals was 2.69 quarterbacks, 8.29 wide receivers, 6.26 running backs, and 2.75 tight ends. So whereas on Underdog, you've got 18 rounds, on DraftKings, you've got 20. So you really want to be piling those extra picks into the wide receivers. And it's an area which we're going to touch on a few times over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes whilst we talk about this before we get into a draft. So the average QB build of the teams in the final, you can see here, we had 7.5% of teams had 4 QBs, 52.8% had only 3 quarterbacks, and 2 quarterback was 39.2%. There were some 5 QB teams. I think it made up 0.4%, which is like 2, maybe 3 teams total. So they weren't a huge amount, and it's not a strategy I'd recommend. I mean, you put in 25% of your total draft capital into one position where only one player can play each week. But it's worth kind of just noticing how many teams had 3 QBs, because quite often when you have an elite quarterback early, it feels easy to just stop at 2. And we'll come more onto that later. Let's take a look at the running backs. Again, we had some outliers. There was a couple of 10 RB teams, which aren't even showing up there. You can see that they had 0.2% of the finals teams had 10 running backs on the teams. But what they did was they had either a 0 RB approach or a hero RB approach. So it's kind of important to understand that when teams were successful taking a lot of running backs, they weren't doing it early. It's like, you paraphrase Mike Leone here, but he says, you can draft running backs early or you can draft a lot of them and draft them later, but you can't do both because it doesn't lead to success. What does stand out is that, between 7 running backs and 6 running backs, it made up sort of 73% of the teams in this almost 1,000 team final had either 6 or 7 running backs total. And it's very rare that I fall into, I never go past 7. And occasionally I'll go 5, which you can see there, 16.4% of teams had 5. But 6 feels like an okay place to go, particularly if you've built with a hero running back or an anchor, double anchor running back build where you've taken 2 early and then you've left the position alone until sort of like round 7 or 8. If you want more information about the hero RB build, check out the description below, because I've got a 15-minute video that tells you all the data you need to know about how to crush with hero RB builds. So let's take a quick look at wide receiver. Again, it's one of those where there's some outliers. There's a 13 wide receiver team in there, a 12 wide receiver team in there, even some over 11. The teams that only had 5 wide receivers, so they were 0.4% of the teams in the final. And they all had 3 QBs. They all had elite tight end and generally spent up on wide receiver early before moving away. So it's kind of like a robust RB approach of going, okay, well, I'm going to get my running backs, in this case, get my wide receivers early, and then I'm just going to really stay away from it and believe in the idea that these stud wide receivers at the top are going to be able to carry me all the way. Typically, though, 7, 8, 9 wide receivers, they were the ones which were most prevalent, and it just makes the most sense. When you start building in these drafts, it's a volatile position, and it seems like the way that I end up sort of quite often with one of those kind of builds. Moving on to tight end, do probably about another 10 minutes or so talking through these before we get into a draft tonight. So again, it's pretty obvious that 3 tight end and 2 tight end builds were the most common. There's nothing too surprising there. I mean, there was 0.3% of teams had 5 tight ends. 4 tight end builds were 6%. But between the 3 tight end and 2 tight end builds, that was over 90% of the total teams in the final. The 5 tight end teams all waited till round 9 or later to take a tight end. So they were really punting position. And I think in that case, it's okay. Last week we did a stream with James Brimacombe of Football Guys, and there we waited until like our last 4 picks and then just took 4 tight ends in a row. And it came out quite nice. So there are viable strategies like that. You've just got to understand where you're piling your resources in. There's no point building 4 tight end teams if you took Travis Kelce in the second round or the first round as it is this year. There were a couple of 1 tight end teams who made it, so 0.2%. It was about 2 teams. And they were both George Kittle teams who really kind of came on strong down the stretch last year. Out of the 3 tight end teams, a little under 5% of them had Travis Kelce on them. So like that elite tight end build where they were really relying on Kelce, but they still backed it up with 2 more. So there were a lot of different ways to thread tight end last year. And I don't think there was anything this year which is like screaming, this is the way to build with tight end. You can build with 2 tight end if you go an elite, or you can build with 3 if you're just taking them slightly later. But how the rosters were built, so we talked about it's like with the averages slightly at the top. QB 3, 6 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. Of the 969 teams to make the finals last year, by far the most common positional allocation was this build. 18% of the teams in the finals, so 180, 190 teams almost of the teams that were there all had 3 quarterbacks, which is quite a bit different to Underdog, where almost half the teams in the Best Ball Mania finals had 2 quarterback builds. Sorry if you can hear the rain chucking it down outside my house. It is really coming down right now. In terms of other roster builds that worked, though, you can see on this slide, again, it's referring to quarterback is the first number, running back the second number, wide receiver the third, and tight end is the 4th number. And you can see that out of the different sort of roster builds there, you're seeing a lot of them had 3 quarterbacks. Out of the top 4, all of them are 3 quarterback builds. Shout out to the Devi Royale. Big fan of these guys. Go and subscribe to their channel. They are absolutely killing it. Even if you do not play Devi, they will make you smarter and you will be ahead of the rest of your league mates when it comes to looking at next year's rookies. Big shout out to them. Okay, I'm going to pop back and grab some questions as we go, but let's keep moving on because I want to talk a little bit about the different types of roster builds that people use with running backs. So out of 969 teams in the final, 490 of them had no definable running back strategy. And if you've followed me in my work over the last few years, I'm a big proponent of sticking to these micro strategies that have been shown to help you win rate and help you really have success. And that team that won it all was a Hero RB team. They took Christian McCaffrey early, and then they didn't touch another running back until Kenneth Gainwell, who must have been at least round 12 last year. So one of the big things that stands out on DraftKings is that Robust RB, a strategy that you don't get many people outwardly selling and trying to say, this is a great strategy. It had almost as many teams in the finals as Zero RB did. And whether that's because Robust RB just doesn't work on Underdog as well as it does over here in full PPR with the 100-yard bonuses that you get for running backs, I don't know. It's tricky not to be able to say without all the data. But over here, it feels like it's definitely viable. And this year, with the way running back position is set up and these running backs falling in around 3 and 4, it's even more viable. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But of those Robust RB teams, most still found a way to get 5 wide receivers by round 10, which makes up for that lack of early investment in the wide receiver position. So double anchor RB means 2 running backs in the first sort of two rounds. Hero running back, 1 running back in the first 2 rounds. And one of the reasons they're successful is because they're flexible thing, they're a flexible build. They allow you to get your wide receivers. They allow you to get other positions. Whereas, you start going zero RB or robust RB, and you're very committed. You're taking detours away from one position, and you have to make up for it. And you can feel like you're chasing yourself at times. But when I see these numbers, it just kind of reinforces that an awful lot of strategies do work on DraftKings at the minute. Here's diving a little more into those robust RB teams. You can see that, a lot of these teams were not taking too many tight ends because they knew they were making up for it, and they had to pile more resources into wide receiver because it avoided them earlier. They'd got 5 wide receivers by round 10, and quite often they were doing things like punting tight end. Ryan in the chat saying zero RB is stressful. Tried it a few times and stuff. Definitely agree. It's one of those strategies where you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and the more you do it, the more you can kind of feel okay with it. And with DraftKings and how you have those extra 2 slots and the scoring that you get rewards for wide receivers having 100-yard games, so that definitely takes the edge off it. It can be a little bit easier over here sometimes. Let's move on. In terms of wide receivers, out of the 900 and that number's wrong at the bottom, 969 teams, 480 of them had made sure they got 5 wide receivers before they got to round 10. And that's something that you'll hear me mention lots of times. Like, it just feels like if you don't have 5 wide receivers by the time you hit round 10, then all of a sudden you're staring at players like Alan Lazard, Juju Smith-Schuster, and you're like, he's probably going to need to be in my flex more weeks than I'd care to really have him there. So it's something that feels very important to me. In terms of teams who went 0 wide receiver before round 5, only 15 of the teams in the final managed that. And 0 wide receiver before round 4, 5%. So really, these teams that got themselves into a situation where they could have won $1 million, they seem to know that they needed to be getting those wide receivers earlier. And let's move. Again, the wide receiver strategy, 5 wide receivers by round 10, it might sound like a lot because you're using 5 of your first 9 picks on them, but it pairs well with so many other strategies. You can use it with 2 tight end builds. You can use it with elite quarterback builds. And all of those kind of carry teams to the finals. If we look at the RotoViz's underdog roster construction tool, we can see that over on Best Ball Mania over the last 2 years, the teams that have got 5 wide receivers by the time they got to round 10 have also done very well in terms of advance rate. Advance rate here is 16%. And particularly if you ended up with 6 to 7, 8 total, then you were doing fine. Ryan saying, yep, sometimes snag a second QB instead to block someone else's stack, which isn't smart. Hey, I mean, the second quarterback, that area of the draft can be a great area to be picking up a second quarterback, so I don't have any problem with it, really. I think you just then have to understand, okay, well, I didn't get my 5 wide receivers by round 10, so I'm really going to have to take a couple more than I would have if I didn't. At tight end, earlier we talked about totals per team, the 5 tight end builds, which were there and stuff. But out of the 969 teams against 989 number is wrong. 115 of the teams in the final had an elite tight end. Punt tight end, which was 0 tight ends before round 11, was also very good. It had 11.43% of the total teams. So, you could either take a tight end early or you could take tight ends later, and it all worked. But if you went super punt tight end, where you took no tight ends before round 15 on DraftKings last year, it did not work. It didn't get you to the final. Only like 1 team out of the entire final had managed to wait until round 15 or later to take the tight ends. I think it's worth mentioning that one of the key differences between DraftKings and Underdog over the last few years has been that Taysom Hill was a quarterback on DraftKings. On Underdog, he was a tight end. And if you look at the advance rate numbers for punt tight end on Underdog, they're much better. But that's because Taysom Hill was there, and we know what a kind of disgusting cheat code Taysom Hill can be. If you look at that sort of stuff, yeah, it's definitely more viable on Underdog. And this year, with Taysom Hill at tight end, maybe it picks up on DraftKings. Again, that's a similar sort of stuff on Underdog, where if you loosen it to round 14 for the first tight end, you can see 17% advance rate for 3 tight end builds, far better than it would have been on DraftKings because, yeah, as we saw, barely any team made it. In terms of common strategy pairings, so this is looking at every single roster, what they use, what kind of micro strategies we broke down, and then saying what helped get them to the final. Wide receiver 5 by round 10 with 2 tight end total was very popular. Hero running back with wide receiver 5 by round 10, very popular. Wide receiver 5 by round 10 with punt tight end or elite quarterback. All these kind of strategies where it's like, if you've been drafting a lot, they probably feel like common sense. But sometimes you get into these drafts and we'll see teams just don't do it. And when you see a team take 3 tight ends and 3 wide receivers in the first 10 rounds, you know that they're just, they're paying the rake. They're dead already. Just got a couple more quick strategy bits we're going to talk about, and then we're going to dive into a draft before I lose my voice. Of the 969 teams to make it into the final last year, this is how many teams had quarterback plus teammate stacks per roster. So 5.4% of teams there had 0 stacks with any of their quarterbacks. That's wide receiver, tight end, running back, just 0 stacks at all, which is almost impressive because it's so easy to just be able to pick up a player in round 15, 16 and add them to your stack. It's almost something that you have to do deliberately to avoid it. But you can see that most commonly teams had 2 total stacks per roster. And that's the bare minimum for me. And we will get into it in a minute, the kind of stacks that we're useful. But I want to hit at least 2 stacks with quarterbacks. If I'm taking a quarterback, I'm always trying to add a stack to it unless it becomes particularly difficult. And then you want to look for correlation instead. Let's move on to the types of stacks we've got there. So these are those kind of common ones. As you can see, QB plus 1 wide receiver. This isn't referring to the wide receiver 1 on the team. It's the just any wide receiver. That was the most popular. 585 instances of that. QB plus 2 wide receivers, second most popular. And those two were far more common than the rest. But as you can see, like big stacks further down the list here, QB plus 2 wide receivers plus a running back, or QB plus wide receiver plus tight end plus running back, they were far less common. And without DraftKings releasing all their data, it's a little tricky to say, is this what didn't work? Or is this just less common over on DraftKings of a field not stacking as much as those of us who are sitting here in June talking about drafting best ball teams, and we've been here for well over a month already. So that's one where it's probably not going to influence how I stack too much, but I'm also slightly more open to small stacks than I have been in the past. Just a couple more slides, and then we're going to get into a draft. In terms of correlation, if we forget about the quarterback stacks, so we're just talking about pairing teammates together, this is how many instances that we see. So the top one there is four lots of 2 players from the same team. So that means, for instance, like 2 players from Denver, 2 players from Philly, 2 players from Kansas City, and 2 from Dallas. And 7 of the top 10 most prominent groupings featured at least 2 teammates from 4 different teams. And that's the kind of correlation we should be looking for, whether you're baking that into your week 17 stacks and trying to bulk out that, or whether you're just looking for little mini correlations that act in the way that you'd build a DFS lineup. So that in any given week, those teammates can combine, or if they're having a big blowout week, it's going to help elevate your team. So, takeaways for 2023, build with positional allocation in mind. We've proved all kinds of strategies can work, even a robust RB, which is not a strategy I've ever talked kindly about. But when you utilize those strategies, you have to be mindful of what you're doing. So, going back to the Mike Leone quote that I mentioned earlier, you can draft running backs early or you can draft a lot of running backs, but you can't do both. So if you like the running back values in the first 5 rounds, be comfortable stopping at 5, be comfortable stopping at 6, but also be comfortable stopping when you get to like 3 running backs through the first 6 rounds or 7 rounds, and make sure you're building up your wide receiver part of your roster so that it can be a strength and not feel like a complete weakness. 3 quarterback builds viable even with an elite quarterback. So just another bit of data. There were 115 elite quarterback builds in the finals last year. And there were 115 elite quarterback builds, part of a 3 quarterback build total. So out of the 969 teams in the final, 3 QB build. Sorry, I've completely lost myself. I'm going to start again on that one. That's awful. Right. There were 698 teams in the finals that had 3 quarterbacks or more. Out of them, there were 115 of them with elite quarterbacks, part of their 3 QB builds. So you can see that a lot of teams didn't need to stop at 2 total. They were quite happy to just keep piling them on. And that's something that I've never done before, and it definitely hurt me at times last year when Lamar Jackson got injured, and I ended up taking zeros at the quarterback position in the playoffs. So whereas on Underdog, you will want to stop at 2. Over here on DraftKings, we should be a little more open to taking 3. Yeah, just going back to what Chris is saying here, that's more correlation than I expected. I know some think the size of a DK final, about 1,200, means the correlation will matter a little bit less. I don't think I agree. Yeah, it's 1,400 people in the final this year, so I think you really need to hit on a number of things. It's almost like entering a GPP. You need to be perfect at so many positions to really win overall this year, because so many teams are going to have similar players. And that's where it comes down to, if we can hit on those late round picks, if they're the players who can really turn good for us, then it should really help us just come good in those final weeks. Small stacks, they're completely fine. We saw the winner had just 1 quarterback plus teammate stack. We also saw that we want 2 or more stacks typically. So instead of going overboard, try to stack 1 team. Aim for 2 quarterbacks who are stacked with at least 1 teammate, and 3 if possible. And then lastly, be flexible. We saw how double anchor RB, hero RB, zero RB, and even robust RB all help teams make the final. There's no need to become so glued to one strategy. And that's something I'm trying to do better at. I'm trying to do more robust RBs when they fall to me in the right area, and just try to mix it up a little bit, particularly at this time of year. In another month, the ADP is going to shift dramatically when more casual users enter the draft boards and are like, why is Joe Mixon going in the 4th round? Why is Derrick Henry at the back end of the 2nd? And they'll start to get pushed up. The quarterbacks, we're already seeing them slide. So take advantage of it now. Get a little freaky. Try things that you wouldn't necessarily normally. And that's kind of, if anyone's got any questions, shout them out now. I'm going to pull up the draft and we will jump into one in a minute. Just need to get that sorted. And while you're here, I know you people will be subscribed already, but if you're not, you know what to do. Go hit the subscribe button. Like I say, we've got Peter Overzet coming on Wednesday. Josh Norris coming on very soon. Awful lot of good stuff coming your way on the Sanctuary. Okay, and if you're waiting to jump into the draft, let's see. Try and give you a couple of seconds warning before I do. Okay, about to jump in now. 1 of 12. Get yourself in there. We should be full up pretty quickly. And we'll draft. I'll keep taking your questions as we go. Hopefully, this will be the $1 million team after we've talked about all those things that we can do to improve our roster. If you're in, shout, let me know. Always fun drafting against you smart people. See Deft Angel in there. See Big Russian. James Lacey, very smart guy. Try to build some very smart best ball tools. Always a pleasure chatting to him. And we're 9 of 12, so we should get underway in a minute. And I think this is about draft 35 in Milly Maker for myself. I've kind of been a little bit slower than I'd like. Been working on too much content. Been working too hard at my day job. But that should all change. Got a few weeks off work coming up. Fully intending to sit around doing nothing but drafting all day. Let's see who else we've got in there. We've lost one, still sitting at 8 of 12. Let me just tweet this out, see if we can't. There we go. Deft Angel onto his third DK Millie of the day and second on a stream. Love to hear it. And that really is the beauty of this best ball summer that we're having. It doesn't sound like summer as I sit here in Gateshead with the rain coming down. But it feels like you can go on Twitter, you can go on YouTube at any point of a minute, and there is just so many DraftKings underdog streams, FFPC streams, drafters streams. And there's no excuse for not building good teams at the minute. There's so many people, so many smart people offering their advice. And I would urge you to go and try and check out some of the smaller channels because there's so many people who've been really cranking it up this summer and really working hard with it. So I'm at the 103 here. And as you can see from my exposures, I've got the Spike Week to add on here to tell me my exposures as I draft. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey. None of them I've particularly drafted an awful lot of yet. I would be happy if Jamar Chase fell. I would be ecstatic if Justin Jefferson fell. And I haven't really taken any Christian McCaffrey because I'm a little bit down on the Niners offense at the minute. I'm kind of slowly coming around on Debo. George Kittle's not somebody I've been drafting. Ayuk, I don't think I've drafted at all. 5%. Kittle, you can see 0%. But McCaffrey, I think he's somebody that I'm going to have to get on board with as the summer goes. Part of me worries slightly about Elijah Mitchell and what it'll look like with this offense. And yeah, just slightly concerned about his ceiling, but not to the point where I only want 3% of him. So I will take him if he falls. Yeah, Ryan's saying something that would be interesting to learn is when they drafted their teams. He's waiting to draft his teams. Again, that's just the kind of data which DraftKings just don't release to us, sadly. It'd be fantastic to know that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, even the guy who won the Millie, I've not seen him talk about his team anywhere. Most of the guys, Pat Kerrane, people like that. Pat Kerrane drafted his in June. I think it's right about this point in the month. And King Capital, who won the regular season prize for Underdog, he was 0 RB team. He drafted it on the same day as Pat, I believe, in June. But Jordan, who's joining us in the draft, excellent, love it. So here we go, Justin Jefferson of a 101, nothing too crazy. Nine seconds. Looks like I'm going to get an auto draft for 102. Jamar Chase. So I will take Christian McCaffrey. I think it's all the players after him. You can see Kelsey, Cup, Tyreek Hill. I'm pretty happy with my exposures to them. The only player I'm not really drafting at the minute is Austin Eckler. I think he's had back-to-back seasons with 18 touchdowns. It's easy to see those regressing. It's easy to see him not getting as many targets near to the line of scrimmage with Justin Herbert healthy and wide receivers actually being healthy. Eckler's splits when both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were healthy last year were a lot worse than they were when they were injured. So he's been a difficult click for me, I'll say, but he goes at 106 in this draft. Appreciate you, Ryan. Thanks for checking us out. See you again soon. And while you're here, people, I appreciate each and every one of you checking in tonight. If you haven't already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. So there we go. Pretty normal first round as things stand so far. Nothing too crazy. Bijan Robinson going after Cup and Tyreek Hill. When drafts first opened, we've seen Bijan going ahead of Eckler. He was the RB2. And I was taking a lot of him. I think for me, I can easily see a world where Bijan Robinson ends up being the RB1 this year. And now I'm at a point where I'm easing back slightly because I do have over 20% exposure to him. Yeah, and Deft Angel pointing out that Eckler could fall if one of these vets go there. Yeah, I mean, Eckler's one of those players who most players in the NFL talk about wanting the ball all the time. But year after year, we hear Austin Eckler say, oh, we need somebody to step up behind me. We need somebody to take the ball a bit more often. We need somebody who's taking some of those harder touches. Because Austin Eckler's very aware that running backs get injured very often, and he just wants somebody to do some of the hard work so that he can be available for those high-value touches. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But you hit a point where it's like, okay, well, what kind of percentage of snap share decrease would actually really start to hurt him? See Team 10 there, stacking A.J. Brown with Jalen Hurts. Have been seeing Jalen Hurts slide. I did a draft earlier today, and I took A.J. Brown and tried to push Jalen Hurts a little bit later. I took A.J. Brown at 1-7 and took Devonta Smith on the way back, hoping that Jalen Hurts would then slide into the third round. But then a team with Stephon Diggs passed up taking Josh Allen and took Jalen Hurts instead. Sometimes you just can't win, really. Patrick Mahomes stacked with Travis Kelce. It feels like that's probably the most common stack that we're seeing in these drafts. It's really straightforward. Diggs taken with Josh Allen, and I'm back on the clock. So I don't really love this area of the draft. I am going to take, let's take Devonta Smith. Love me some Devonta Smith. You can argue that perhaps his ADP is a little high at the minute, but last year he was fantastic. You know, he had some really great spike weeks attached to that offense. You know, the Eagles this year, they're going to have a tougher schedule. Last year they had a very easy schedule, but after winning their division this year, perhaps they're going to be in more situations where they can't take their foot off the gas and just run the ball. Perhaps they're going to have to throw more. And if that happens, all aboard Devonta Smith for another year. Really likable player as well, which always helps. It's always fun to draft the guys who you actually like. Which is why you won't actually see me draft Deshaun Watson very often, if at all. Team 2 takes Jamar Chase for a T. Higgins, Joe Burrow stack. That is lovely. And I am going to take... Let's take Chris Olave. I haven't taken much Chris Olave at all. And he's one of those players where just when you're checking in on your exposure, which I always recommend doing regularly, because there's nothing that I have against Chris Olave. Over the last few weeks, I've kept getting draft spots at the back end of this draft board, and Chris Olave just hasn't fallen to me. So now with a chance to draft him, I like that. And you can see through the first 3 rounds, you can always do pretty much whatever you want. Now I'm settled, though, into kind of like a hero RB build. If one of these running backs who I do like, you know, say somebody like a Breece Hall fell all the way to me in the 4th round, which I don't think will happen in this draft room with this many smart people, then I'd possibly consider that. But yeah, it's a little bit... I'm quite happy taking the hero RB build, leaning a wide receiver and seeing what else falls to me for a bit. Chris making a point that it was a little early for Burrow. Team 2 probably could have pushed that around 4, 5, 10. And I think that's fair, definitely. You know, we've seen it's difficult sometimes when you've got pieces of the stack to have the confidence a player's going to come back to you. But that drafter already had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I do not want Joe Burrow. I don't want Joe Burrow without those pieces. I'm not going to go and take Irv Smith and Tyler Boyd and feel like if the Bengals explode in week 17, it's all going to be through Irv Smith and Tyler Boyd. And you can clip this out and bring it back to me in week 17 when that does happen. But for now, I'm willing to take that chance. And sometimes, yeah, you've got to push it. But on the flip side, if Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow does turn nuclear at that point, you can understand the reach, and it's a very appealing stack to have. Shout out to all the fathers in the chat spending their Father's Day drafting on Best Ball and being a degenerate like myself. Been a long day of entertaining the kids. Got to find some peace and quiet to draft a Best Ball team every now and then when you can. So, nothing too crazy through the first few rounds. Got a nice 0 RB team here with CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, and Christian Kirk there. I like that team a lot. Chris's team at pick 12. Amon Ra, Devontae Adams, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. It's kind of like a late double anchor RB team. Yeah, Eric made a point. People on DraftKings take Burrow unstacked all the time. Yeah, it's as much as I defend this platform and it's getting better, there's definitely a lot of people who just see a player at the top of their queue and they just can't bypass them. They just feel the need to click on them. This turn will be interesting. You've got Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Jackson all taken. I was going to say that if James there didn't take Justin Fields, I can make an argument for trying to push Justin Fields around the corner, perhaps taking DJ Moore at 410, but now that he's gone, back to the drawing board. So a scenario of the draft where there's a bunch of players I don't particularly like. Travis Etienne, I've drafted 0 of. Joe Mixon, I don't mind too much, but I'm not desperate to take him. Christian Watson, I don't think he should be priced where he's going. TJ Hawkinson, I do quite like and might be an option here. Mike Williams, I feel like I've got a little more than I'd like at the minute. And DJ Moore, I would have taken if Justin Fields was still here, but he's not. So let's take TJ Hawkinson. Again, another player like Devonta Smith, who I was quite high on last year. Really won me some money in some dynasty leagues and some best ball leagues, and he had a great season. You know, between when he joined the Lions, when he left the Lions and joined the Vikings, he tied Travis Kelce for targets and receptions. He was absolutely dominant, and I'm not sure that he's going to surpass Mark Andrews with a healthy Lamar Jackson, says the Ravens fan. But I do quite like him, and I do think he's got a good chance to be very fantasy viable this year. Back on the clock, so we've got 1 running back, 2 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. Let's have a little sweep down. Yeah. Let's go with 10 seconds. Tick, 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 tick. We'll go with Alexander Mattison. I've drafted 0 Alexander Mattison. I don't particularly love the fact that I'm kind of drafting him when people are drafting him several rounds later, not so long ago. But I'm counting on my ability to build better than a lot of those teams were, and also accepting that in another couple of weeks, Alexander Mattison's ADP could be in the 4th round. It could even creep towards that 312 mark, because July and August drafters, they love running backs, and year after year we see a bunch of running backs get pushed up drafts. So the team at pick 4 went Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen to start the draft, and then hasn't taken another wide receiver since. Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, and Cam Akers. That feels like a very fragile running back room, but not one that, you know, if they live up to their ceiling, they could be fantastic. We've got another 3 running back team here in the middle on the clock at the minute. Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne. It's tricky because right about now, wide receivers are drying up. You know, you're talking about Terry McLaurin, you're talking about Mike Williams. You know, look at it here. Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, Brandon Ayuk. Plenty of problems with all those players, and that's before we get to kind of Kadarius Toney. So that's why I struggle not taking wide receivers early. If I have 1 running back, then it's fine. You can build those wide receivers to a point. It's fine. But if I've taken 3 running backs early and I only have 1 wide receiver now, counting on someone like DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin to be wide receiver 2, it can just feel a little bit shaky sometimes. So This team at the 10th spot has a nice build here. AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, and J.K. Dobbins. One of the things I talked about in the running back, hero running back video, which is on the channel, 15 minutes long, goes over historic win rate data for running backs and talking about how we can spin that forward for 2023 with all these running backs falling. Players like J.K. Dobbins, you can still take them and treat them as a hero RB build. You just have to say, okay, well, I'm only going to take one running back in the first 6 rounds and then spend the rest of my picks on wide receivers like I would have done if I'd taken a hero running back in round 2 or round 3 or round 1. As long as we're being cognizant of how we're building and where we're spending all that draft capital that we talked about in the slides at the top of the stream, then we should be okay. So if you're in the draft, drop me a comment. Tell me how you're feeling about your draft so far. Deft Angel with his 4 wide receivers, 2 running backs. James, he's got Justin Fields. Skinny with 2 running backs, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard, Cooper Kupp, and Drake London, players that I take a lot of. Jordan, whereabouts are you picking in this draft? Let us know. Drop it in the comments when you get a chance. See Justin Herbert stacked there with Mike Williams. It's quite a nice team with Tyreek Hill, Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper in the 4th round feels okay. I've seen him going at the 312, kind of around there, and I can't quite pull the trigger for a player who's going to play in bad weather. And, we've seen him kind of be up and down. Okay, so Jordan's picking from the 11th team. He's got that nice Jaguar stack with Kirk, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. I see what you're doing there. And I'll be on the clock in 1 second. We'll see if the team at 4 takes another wide receiver. If they don't, it's going to start looking pretty shaky there with just Stephon Diggs. If they take Jordan Addison, who I absolutely would have taken there, but we won't get too upset about it. I'm not taking Kadarius Toney here. I feel like that's one which I can't pull the trigger on. I have my tight end, so I'm not taking Kyle Pitts. I'm going to take Jackson Smith-Njigba. I know that people will talk about, how often is he going to be on the field? The Seahawks didn't play a lot of free wide receiver sets last year, and that's fine. I'm not counting on him to do that early. I'm going to take a decent amount of wide receivers here, probably enough to make up for that. But I'm counting that down the stretch run, he can be like Amon-Ra St. Brown, where he could have games where he sees 10 targets and he's got like 9 of his points are just from pure receptions because they're near the line of scrimmage. And Jackson Smith-Njigba's talent, the ceiling is so good that, I can absolutely see a world where he has to be on the field and the Seahawks know that. I mean, Pete Carroll, much as he loves to run the ball, much as he loves to do some stuff that we disagree with, he's not completely stupid. You can definitely see what he's got in these players. So we're back on the clock. So far, I have just the 3 wide receivers, so I would like another wide receiver in this range. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger on. We'll go George Pickens. Not somebody I've picked a lot. Gives me a little bit of week 17 correlation with Jackson Smith-Njigba. Seahawks against Steelers, which could be a terrible game, under no illusions. But it also could be a very fun game. George Pickens to me is somebody who feels like, he can be a big play player rather than a big points player. Last year had a lot of games where he didn't give you huge point returns, but the Steelers, they know how to coach wide receivers. As a Ravens fan, I've seen it far too many times, and I don't want to bet against players who are in okay situations. And make no mistake, the Steelers are going to have positive touchdown regression this year. Kenny Pickett's rate last year was insanely low. They did not let him throw. They didn't score passing touchdowns, and that is definitely going to improve as he becomes more comfortable, as well as George Pickens. Jack saying the Bucs wide receiver disrespect is just out of hand at this point. I don't care how bad the QB plays. yeah, on Wednesday, I drafted a team with Colin Kelly. We took Chris Godwin, we took Mike Evans, and we even took Baker Mayfield later on. And it's tricky because Godwin, I take a lot of because I think of him like the Jarvis Landry role when Baker Mayfield was in Cleveland. And it's like, okay, even a bad quarterback like Baker Mayfield can hit the layups to the slot. I do worry slightly about Mike Evans because those kind of deep downfield shots are trickier, and you're really relying on a good quarterback and wide receiver relationship. You go back to even when James Winston was there, he talked about how good a relationship he had with Mike Evans. And when Deshaun Jackson joined the team, it was always Mike Evans was getting the ball because Mike Evans had earned the ball. And hopefully Baker Mayfield can get on the same page with him. But yeah, I mean, hey, Mike Evans was what you needed last year. Week 17 was a ridiculous amount of points. And if you're talking about Mike Evans or in this draft, if Mike Evans had made it back around the corner, I absolutely would have taken him. After him, we see Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham going a couple of rounds ahead of ADP, George Pickens, Gabe Davis, Kadarius Toney. Absolutely Mike Evans all day over them. I think that would have been a very easy click for me. So I've got two running backs, Christian McCaffrey, Alexander Mattison, wide receiver, Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and George Pickens, as well as TJ Hawkinson. So it feels like we're in a nice area of the draft. I don't particularly have to do anything that I don't want to here. I can take a wide receiver, take a running back, take a tight end. In terms of the players available, with Rachaad White, Deshaun Watson, Alvin Kamara, Cortland Sutton, Javonte Williams, Elijah Moore, James Cook, Kirk Cousins, Anthony Richardson, Brian Robinson, Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman just creeping above Zay Flowers in ADP now, which feels like the right choice to me. Okay, so one pick away. Elijah Moore goes to the team behind me. Kirk Cousins here would give us a stack with TJ Hawkinson. I don't mind that. I'm not anti-Kirk Cousins at all. But let's see if we can push him around the corner, see if he comes back, and take Rashad Bateman. Look, I'm a Ravens fan. I don't apologize for it. I'm always going to have heavy exposure to those guys, and it feels like Rashad Bateman is going to be the wide receiver one in this offense. And with this team having Lamar Jackson and this team having Joe Burrow, I feel like there's a reasonable chance that Kirk Cousins makes it back around. Of course, one of those teams just takes Deshaun Watson. But if Kirk Cousins makes it back, then that'll be the pick there. And as I say that, the team at the one spot takes Aaron Rodgers, also a little bit ahead of ADP. So they have 3 wide receivers through 9 rounds. 2 picks away now. It wouldn't surprise me if Kirk Cousins went here, despite those teams having 2 quarterbacks each. James in the chat, who's picking under the name Big Russian, saying that DK froze for him. That's never fun. So, yeah. So, Kirk Cousins comes back right about ADP with the TJ Hawkinson stack. Completely fine with that. You know what you're getting with Kirk Cousins, but on DraftKings with the bonuses for 300 passing yards, it does make Kirk Cousins slightly more interesting. I mean, last year there were numerous players who had 300-yard passing games. In terms of most, it was Patrick Mahomes, who I think had something ridiculous like 10, and then no other quarterback had more than 6. And I believe Kirk Cousins was right up there. Jared Goff had 6. So you can never really guess too much where they're coming from. But the Vikings have Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, and TJ Hawkinson. That looks like a team to me that's going to be set up to pass the ball well. So through 9 rounds, we talked earlier about having 5 wide receivers before round 10. Out of the teams in here, you can see Deft Angel, who's not taking his 9th round pick, has already got those 5. Jiggle at the 11th pick has 6. Then we've got a team with 3. Got a team with down here with 4, 4, and 3. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're dead by any means. It's, only half the teams in that final were kind of like at that point where they had those. But it does mean that you still need to keep plowing into that position. Whereas if you've hit 5 by this point, you're talking 2, 3 picks more on the position total. In terms of the players at the top of the draft board, this is a really nice part of the draft board. I always enjoy this point because you start seeing a nice little area where it's like, right, well, I could go with quarterback, I could go with running back, I could go with tight end. Wide receiver, it's a bit uglier. And look, yeah, Jameson Williams suspended for the first 6 games. Juju Smith-Schuster, apparently still dealing with a knee injury. Tyler Boyd, who I don't particularly care for. I'll take some if I've got Joe Burrow. Rondale Moore, Jacoby Myers, Adam Thielen. It feels a little dusty around this point. Let's see, a few picks away. Ryan saying, not saying he'll be Brady, but Trask is an interesting unknown. If he wins starting quarterback, it's a great sign for the wide receiver being viable. If Baker wins, watch out. Yeah, and I agree. I think where I struggle with Trask is that he wasn't even the backup when Tom Brady didn't play over the last couple of years. And whereas in Green Bay, we've heard plenty of propaganda about Jordan Love, and we've seen points where it's like the team clearly liked him. Kyle Trask could be the starter for 10-plus games this year, or he could get cut during training camp, and it probably wouldn't surprise anyone, would it? It's like, it's a really difficult unknown. But sometimes, ambiguity provides opportunity. And Will Bromley, who's in the chat, sent me a question on Twitter recently saying, if we're high on players on a quarterback's weapons, shouldn't we be, by nature, higher on the quarterback at a certain point? And that's absolutely right. One thing I got wrong last year was not taking enough shots on 20th round Geno Smith or 20th round Drew Lock. And obviously, Geno won out. But drafting Tyler Lockett and drafting DK Metcalf and even drafting Noah Fant late on, but I wasn't drafting Geno anywhere close to enough. So this year, I am trying to build those backdoor stacks where it's like, okay, well, I've taken one of these players and it might feel ugly, but I'm not counting on a player to really start an awful lot of games, but I will take them at a value. So we've got Zach Charbonnet at the top here. Gives a little bit more of that kind of week 17 correlation. Don't mind him at all. Add him to the queue unless anyone else. Actually, let's go with Rondale Moore. Gives a bit of week 15 and week 17 correlation. Devonta Smith and Rondale Moore. And Hayden Winks was pointing out recently how Rondale Moore played a lot of the times on 2 wide receiver sets last year. He played outside a decent amount. And he's possibly not just the pure slot player that we kind of think of him as. And obviously now DeAndre Hopkins is gone. So, so one more pick and then it'll be back to me. Still just one quarterback at this point. I'm kind of fine with that. Nothing too much stands out. I don't have anybody to stack with Jared Goff. Russell Wilson isn't overly appealing. So at this point, we'll take Zach Charbonnet, who slipped 10 points past his ADP, give us a bit of correlation against the Eagles in week 15 and then the Steelers in week 17. And that's my third running back off the board. If you're in the draft, drop a comment. Let me know how you're feeling about your draft through 11 rounds. Cheers to everyone joining me. So Nico Collins there in the 11th round. He's been creeping up draft boards over the last few weeks when I drafted with Pat Kerrane about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. He talked about taking him ahead of ADP when we were in like the 13th round because the wide receivers just start to dry up at that point and it gets a bit ugly, and he believed that Nico Collins deserved to be there. So, Chris asking what beer I'm on. Krabby's ginger beer, alcoholic ginger beer. Very good stuff, very refreshing for what is clearly not a hot day at the minute in Gateshead. Had a rather heavy night last night, so just nice and refreshing beer to round out the weekend. So, in terms of teams that we've only got a couple of teams that have got more than two quarterbacks. So the teams at the start, the Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson teams, they both went with their second quarterbacks right at the same point in the 8th round, which perhaps they didn't need to do. I mean, we talked about earlier how 3 QB teams did make a good portion of the teams in the finals. So it'd be interesting to see if they take a third one. Personally, at this point, I'm kind of okay waiting a little bit, perhaps seeing what falls to me. You know, players like George Pickens that could stack. Got Derek Carr could stack with Chris Olave if he's still there when it gets back to me, but it doesn't feel necessarily like a need. And in this area of the draft, there's a lot of running backs I like. Damian Harris, Jalen Warren, both gone already, but they were players who I absolutely would have taken. Will making the point that, yeah, with Trask, the upside for the wide receivers is priced into the current price, downside too. Yeah, it's completely kind of fair where the players are going. Like, you know, yeah, as we talked about earlier, with disrespect, probably it's gone a little far, but I think with disrespect sometimes doesn't always take into account the ceiling performances, because we see bad players have ceiling games with bad quarterbacks plenty of the time. You know, the two aren't mutually exclusive. So it's kind of a balancing act of saying, okay, well, how much exposure do I want to this player who I would deem in a risky situation? And I always kind of go through a sliding scale of players in the early rounds. I don't want to be too much more over than 15%. And at the minute, I'm at like 25% on Cup and Bijan Robinson. I will bring that down as I get much higher on my drafts. But by the time you get to these rounds, I'm okay being at sort of 20, 25%. Lots of other players who've won big have gone far more aggressive than that. You know, we've seen Liam, who won Best Ball Mania 2. He had like 60% Gabe Davis. Felix, who won Draftkings Milly Maker 2 years ago, not last year, the year before, he had 75% Cooper Kupp that year. At the time, it was when Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods were almost back-to-back in ADP. But Felix made the bet that Cooper Kupp was what he needed, and he drafted an absolute shitload of him, and it made him $1 million. It's kind of hard to argue with it, you know, obviously in hindsight, but very much it worked out for him. Going to take Jamal Williams, who I feel like there's a good chance that Alvin Kamara doesn't play it down for the Saints this year. Saints were always a team I struggled to second guess, but with legal issues, with the suspension, it just feels like there's a possibility where Jamal Williams and Kendrick Miller are the two running backs who are playing the vast majority of work there. So 2 picks away from my next pick. These teams have both got 2 quarterbacks. Kind of hoping that Kyler Murray might make it back to me, because I have Rondale Moore, and I'll just add that little stack there. Right about ADP, 148 on his ADP, and give us correlation with the Niners in week 15 and the Eagles in week 17 with Devonta Smith. And I think absolutely Kyler Murray is going to be playing in week 17. I know that people are talking about he could possibly miss the year, but this is a new Cardinals front office, new Cardinals head coach. They have to see what they have out of Kyler Murray before they make possibly 2 very high draft picks next year. And whether that's putting him on the market so people can see that his knee's healthy, whether that's putting him out there so they can see whether he's learned the offense which they've installed. I do believe he's going to play a good portion of the season. People talk about Kyler Murray could miss the whole season, but look back to when Joe Burrow tore his ACL. He was back on the field for week 1, and it turned out to be a complete overreaction from us. Yes, Kyler Murray waited until January to get the surgery because of swelling and meniscus injury, which was also attached to the ACL. But this isn't like a J.K. Dobbins level injury where you've torn your PCL, MCL, and a whole other load of abbreviations that I don't understand. It was ACL, meniscus, and by all accounts, he looks healthy. He's doing well. And if Kyler Murray is back on the field by, say, week 4, that is a fantastic value in the 13th round. You know, he's always averaged sort of over 17 fantasy points per game. And I would have no doubt that he'd probably be in my lineup a lot more than Kirk Cousins in that situation. A little run of tight ends there. Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, Smith going off the board. Teams kind of look to shore up that position. You know, we're in an area where it's very easy to do that. You know, and a lot of teams now will be happy with their tight end builds. You see there, James, who's got 3 tight ends now. He's got Cole Kmet, Chigozie Okonkwo, Kyle Pitts. Then the team next to him, who has Dulcich and Gerald Everett in back-to-back picks. And then a team with Irv Smith and Mark Andrews, who could be done there as well. If you haven't already, hit that like button down there. That one, hit it. Hit the subscribe button. We are getting very, very close to our training camp goal of 1,000 subscribers. And honestly, I can't thank you all enough. I know it feels unnecessary sometimes for you to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, but those really influence how much these videos get out there on YouTube. And so much of our YouTube traffic comes from people who find the stuff based on YouTube's algorithm and recommendations. We have 96 more subscribers to go before training camp. We are absolutely smashing that thanks to the good people tuning in with Fantasy Sanctuary tonight. Got Chris with Fantasy Football Garage. I'm higher on the Cardinals players in general, expecting them to be a better team in the season. Michael Wilson is an interesting bring back for Eagle players. Yeah, I think, look, it wouldn't surprise me to see the Cardinals be an absolute, dumpster fire this year. But it also wouldn't surprise me to see them be kind of like the Bears were last year, where they were fantasy viable whilst also losing lots of games. Justin Fields, how many times did he put up huge games, but then the Bears would just lose by, a touchdown or so, or 2 touchdowns late in the game? Coming back up on his pick. So we're at 2-4-6-1 build, not feeling particularly stressed about needing to go in any particular direction here. But we will go with let's go with CJ Stroud. This feels like a free quarterback build for me with Kirk Cousins, Kyler Murray. If Kyler Murray does miss, say, 6 to 8 teams, then I'm going to want a second quarterback early in the season just to possibly give me some ceiling performances. And the Texans, I'm sneaky high on them this year. I think there's a world where they're going to be much better than people believe because their offensive line is going to be a strength this year. We know the coaching staff that's come over from the Niners is a team that builds through offense. So I'll grab John Mechie there to just add to that little CJ Stroud stack. And at 7 wide receivers now, I might probably only take one more through the rest of the draft. Let's see where we end up. 3-4-7-1. Probably looking for 2 more tight ends after leaving the position alone for a while. Bad teams are plenty fantasy viable, plenty of the time. I mean, think back to the best example is Jameis Winston's 30 for 30, where he threw 30 interceptions at the same time as throwing 30 touchdowns that season. He was a complete mess. That team struggled, but, he kept throwing it deep. And if you can attach to a player who wants to throw it deep, that's always nice. I mean, Kirk Cousins isn't always going to let it loose as much as we might like him to, but Kyler Murray, over the last few years, it feels like all the best stuff that happened with the Cardinals wasn't the coaching. It wasn't from, Cliff Kingsbury. It was when the plays broke down and Kyler Murray just kept the play alive and kept going and turned something into magic. And he was fantastic. And I was always a big downer on Cliff Kingsbury. I was very much glad to see him go. The run game was always fantastic under Cliff Kingsbury, which part of me worries that now I'm too high on James Conner coming into this year because things are going to change slightly. But I do believe that the offense is still going to be fine. So we've got a one quarterback team build over here. Jalen Hurts drafter, who went 1-5-7-2 with kind of that late hero start with J.K. Dobbins in the 5th round. Double dipped at tight end, Dallas Goedert to build out that stack, then Darren Waller. 4 running backs in a row with Pacheco, Robinson, Khalil Herbert, Rashad Penny. And then it's been hitting wide receiver heavy. I quite like that. That's speaking to what we talked about in terms of understanding the positional allocation of what your build is and saying, okay, well, here I need to put so many picks into these players. And quite often when you build with draft strategy in mind, then it can make up for the inadequacies of the players. Like, you're talking about the difference between Van Jefferson and Rashid Shaheed, Van Jefferson and Tyquan Thornton. It's pretty minimal, but making sure you get a wide receiver at that point rather than a position that you don't need, that can be the key sometimes. Let's see if that team decides to take a quarterback here. They've kind of given themselves a couple of layouts. Curtis Samuel, maybe they go with Sam Howell. I know he's somebody that some of the best ball community are high on. I struggle with that. I struggle to believe that new owners would pay $6 billion and be content watching Sam Howell. No offense to Sam. I know he's a big fan of the show. There we go. Sam Howell, Curtis Samuel, Brian Robinson there as well. So, it's a nice little Washington stack. Don't mind that pick at all. And perhaps I need some exposure to him. Eric saying he just got Cup, Amon, Jacobs, and Najee out of a 10 slot. No, I'm a known Najee hater, but even I can't disagree with that. Sounds fantastic. So we're coming back up to me, a couple picks away. As I mentioned, I got 3-4-7-1 build. So let's take a skim through. Done at quarterback. Running back, we could possibly do with another one, but not feeling desperate need right now. Wide receiver. It's one name that stands out, Greg Dortch, but I'm going to try and push him around the corner, see if he comes back to me. Tight end is probably the weakest position right now. Taysom Hill, 32 spots past ADP. I'm going to take that. I already have some of the Saints players on my team. I've got Chris Olave, I've got Jamal Williams. So it just gives me that kind of team stack without the need for the quarterback, because what does Derek Carr's ceiling look like? Well, we've seen it for a bunch of years. It's pretty minimal. Like, he wasn't fantasy viable overly last year when he had Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow. So I'm not worrying about having a quarterback attached to these, because it could easily be Taysom Hill who's throwing the touchdowns when they happen. Greg Dortch makes it back. That's now we're at 3-4-8-2. So I'm probably content at wide receiver unless there's a player I really like. And it felt like a good time to get another tight end with Gesicki, Musgrave, both going off before me. And we see Tyler Conklin, a player I've taken a bit of this year, going after. So on Wednesday, we'll have Pete Overzet joining us. We won't be drafting on that one. We're just going to talk about the best ball landscape in 2023. We're going to talk about some zero RB targets, late round targets, players we really like. If you do have questions, send us a DM on Twitter. Would love to be able to put some of your questions to Pete. It should be a fun show. It's always very entertaining. After him, we've got Josh Norris coming up in a couple of weeks. He's going to be talking about wide receivers who could break out in the late rounds. Last year, he called Zay Jones breakout, and that was a very profitable one. Zay Jones was absolute dynamite last year, so hopefully Josh can give us the kind of info that turns into money again. We also have some other great names that you're going to recognize. Tomorrow night on the channel, Rich will be drafting a live Dynasty Startup draft with a couple of people who you would definitely recognize from the Dynasty community. That's going to be great. That's already up on the channel in terms of you can go and hit the notification bell, so it's going to give you a reminder when it goes live. They'll be talking about different ways that you can start dynasties, different ways that you can avoid going into a rebuild straight away. If there is more strategy elements, or you want to talk more about the data from the previous finals, drop me a DM on Twitter. Let me know what kind of stuff you want to hear. We still have almost 3 months of best ball drafts before the season starts. It feels crazy because we've been drafting for a good few weeks this year, but there's a lot to go. I'm going to have a video similar to the Hero RB one where I talk about advance rates and how to build successfully with that. I'm going to do that for Zero RB. I'm going to look at some other stuff as well for different ways that we can build. So coming up on my pick here, for me, it's Trey McBride. I'll be taking him as long as nobody snipes him. If we do snipe him, I will not be taking Zach Ertz. There we go. Gives us that little stack. We've got a 3-4-8-3 build now. And week 17, Trey McBride, Greg Dortch, Kyler Murray, Rondale Moore. It's possibly a little more of a stack than I need. We talked earlier on in the show about how some of the stacks that were successful weren't massive stacks. But here I'm building a slightly bigger stack because there just feels like so many unanswered questions with the Cardinals. So Greg Dortch could be cut. He could be moved on. He was good last year, but he strikes me as the kind of player that some coaching teams just don't particularly care for. There could be a lot of change by then. Perhaps Trey McBride by week 17 is behind Zach Ertz if he recovers from his knee issues. But I'm kind of all right taking that bet. I don't want to worry too much about that right now. And if he makes it back to me here, I will be taking Dwayne McBride for Vikings, who we've all seen plenty of Alexander Mattison. I like Alexander Mattison, and I don't normally handcuff running backs, but I'm open to it when there's certain sort of situations. And we've seen Alexander Mattison get hurt at times. It's entirely possible that he could just be not good. When he's come in behind Dalvin Cook, he has been good. And when he's played like over 50% of snaps, he's always scored good fantasy points. But what if the Vikings missed the playoffs? And last year they were a team who their DVOA of Football Outsiders metric, they didn't deserve to have as many wins as they did because they were, it was always kind of, they got lucky. The ball bounced their way a lot. And if by week 17 they decide we want to take a bigger look at Dwayne McBride, completely fine with taking that sort of risk here. It's not something I would do often, but I don't mind it. Deft Angel saying I've got 2 game stacks with 6 and 5 players respectively. So yeah, picking from the 12, you can see that he has Dak Prescott with Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup, Jake Ferguson. He also has, and so the Cowboys play the Lions that week, which, correct me if I'm wrong off the top of my head, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. Yeah. And I think, we saw the winning team, although it wasn't a pretty team, there was a lot of correlation in it, so I don't mind that at all. Coming into the last round, so I've got a 3-5-8-3 build. And I have McCaffrey, Madison, Charbonnet, Williams, and McBride. I only took 2 wide receivers since round 10, so I'm kind of open to another wide receiver here. Sometimes I'd be looking at a running back, but I feel kind of fine with it. I will move that comment off screen. So Ryan saying I have more faith than most in Ryan's changed the whole culture in Houston and being a surprise in a lot of areas, especially Stroud. Completely agree. Like, there's a lot of positives to what the Texans have done this offseason. Yes, you can look at wide receiver and you can say, okay, I mean, if they go and get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, how does that change our outlook about that offense? It could be really different. CJ Stroud has played with some excellent players. He went to bat for some of the wide receivers they drafted. John Mechie, we don't know. By all accounts, he's made a full recovery from leukemia. Nico Collins was pretty good at times last year. He wasn't terrible. I definitely feel they're okay. And as much as people talked about Derrick Henry getting to play the Texans twice over the last 3 weeks, I look at the Texans getting to play the Titans twice over the last 3 weeks and feel pretty good about that. So a couple of clicks away from our final pick here. Xavier Hutchinson was, I believe, the guy who CJ Stroud talked up. Don't really feel the need to grab him. You can see if I go by team, I've already got Stroud and Mechie. Maybe. Who else is there? It's not too appealing, really. Scroll down. Just gets a bit good. Tell you what, let's take Noah Brown, who last year had some decent games when he was with the Cowboys. It was a lot of fun at times, and yes, he moved on, but I'm okay with that. So a recap, I have Christian McCaffrey, Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, TJ Hawkinson, Alexander Mattison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, George Pickens, Rashad Bateman, Kirk Cousins, Rondale Moore, Zach Charbonnet, Jamal Williams, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, John Mechie, Taysom Hill, Greg Dortch, Trey McBride, Dwayne McBride, got the McBride stack, that's always important, and Noah Brown. Quite happy with that. In terms of other teams that are in here, James, who was picking at the 7 spot, got Cooper Kupp, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard, like that kind of double anchor RB from the 3rd round. Justin Fields, Drake London, Tyler Lockett, Kyle Pitts, David Montgomery. That's a nice bit of correlation there in terms of Atlanta and Chicago. Zay Flowers, Geno Smith, Chigozie Okonkwo, Sky Moore, Cole Kmet, stacked with Justin Fields, Rashad Shaheed, Kenneth Gainwell, Devin Singletary, Chase Claypool, again stacked with Justin Fields, Desmond Ridder, Zach Evans, and Calvin Austin. That's quite a nice team. I had 2 of 10 of QB, 3 wide receiver plus 10 on the same team. So, yeah, plenty of good teams in here. It's, really smart draft. Again, a lot of teams that are really nice and look like they were built sensibly, thinking about, all the stuff we talked about at the top of the draft. And those are the kind of things that, look, you don't have to go into every draft and really pile in on certain things. You don't have to say, I'm going to do this because I saw that this many teams did this last year, and that's what worked for them. But if you're cognizant of it and thinking, okay, well, these are the kind of things that worked, how can I apply them based on this year's ADP, based on the draft board in front of me? Then I strongly believe it's going to lead to lots of winning teams, and I think that there are little edges that, because DraftKings don't publish the data, because there aren't as many people pumping out content about it like there are with Underdog and like there are with FFPC, that if we look at the data in just whatever way we can, then it can be really helpful to us. So we're going to call it a night there. This has been a long one because we did the draw at the top, then we did all the talking DraftKings strategy. I really do appreciate everyone who's stuck with it. Ryan, Matt, Chris, Eric, Chris from Fantasy Football Garage, go check out his channel. James, Will, Jordan, thank you so much for being here tonight. We'll be back on Wednesday with Pete Overzet. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button if you're not. We'll be back tomorrow night with a Dynasty Startup. Appreciate you all. See you later.